So going into this offseason for the Bulls, we were promised change after the Bulls failed to make the playoffs for the second straight season. At his season-ending press conference, we heard from Arturas Karnisovas that he recognized when it was time to make changes and that the time for change is now. And while I'm sure a lot of us didn't believe AK when he made those comments at the time, as we have to take his words at face value until actioned upon, but sure enough, the Bulls would go on to make some significant changes by moving Caruso to the Thunder in exchange for Josh Giddey, and of course moving on from DeMar DeRozan and executing that sign-in trade with the Kings, where the Bulls would return a couple of second-round picks and Chris Duarte. The Bulls would also let Drummond walk in free agency and sign the young backup center in Jalen Smith to take his place. And it was becoming increasingly clear that the Bulls were going younger and heading down a path of rebuilding and development. And while we can sit here and criticize how long it took the front office to finally come to this realization and not capitalizing on the return that they got for Alex Caruso, or letting Drummond walk for nothing when draft capital was on the table at the deadline, but at the end of the day, this is where the Bulls find themselves right now, and they have to figure out how to make the best of their current situation. But the biggest problem the Bulls find themselves in right now is finding the delicate balance of trying to trade their max player and once franchise cornerstone while also maintaining that relationship with him to try and build up his trade value by returning to the team this upcoming season. Not an easy task when you know you need to trade this guy while also making it seem like everything is okay and you're just getting ready for this upcoming year. But the Bulls, however, are failing miserably at this, with the disconnect between members of the organization, the front office, and the coaching staff. How, you might ask? Well, let's talk about it. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, you're probably asking, how did this topic even come about? And some of this, of course, we already knew. We knew that the Bulls' #1 priority going into this offseason, even before they made their first move in trading Caruso, was to find a trade partner for Zach LaVine. And we knew there was some tension going back to the start of last season, with the Bulls starting out the year slow, Zach then more or less requesting a trade, and the Bulls obviously not finding a trade for him prior to the deadline, which was exacerbated when Zack LaVine opted for season-ending surgery. None of that is new, but the reason this has recently resurfaced in a new light is because of a recent column coming from ESPN's Jamal Collier, in which he discussed the changes the Bulls have made thus far this offseason, but the ongoing saga between the organization and Zach LaVine. I'll leave a link to the article in case you missed it, as there is a lot of good detail in there recapping the Bulls' current offseason, the approach of the front office, as well as what members within the organization are saying about the situation with Zach LaVine. But the biggest thing that stood out to me from this article, and what boggles my mind about the Bulls handling the situation with Zach, is that on one hand you hear about how the Bulls are doing what they can to repair the relationship with Zach LaVine and prepare him for the upcoming season to bring his value back up, repair the negative perception around the league that he isn't a winning player and a guy on a max contract that is injury prone and on the decline. Collier discussed how the Bulls are preparing to welcome LaVine back to training camp this fall, how he's fully recovered from his injury, how he's been in communication with the Bulls, who also had trainers in LA this summer to visit him for workouts. He even went on to mention that Billy Donovan flew out to LA this month to spend time with Zach and continue to invest in their relationship, which according to the article went well and was positive. And the front office, specifically Mark Eversley, said, quote, "We're looking forward to having him come back to training camp and joining the team." All good PR moves for the Bulls, right? At least publicly facing, showing they're trying to do what they can to keep Zach's morale up and letting them know they're trying to work with him, that they're committed to making this work going into the season, and getting him to a place that makes sense for him to be able to buy into a system that is going to help and develop some of the younger guys going forward. But the biggest bomb to me from this article is that of all this positive sentiment around Zach LaVine, the front office and coaching staff trying to maintain a professional and cordial relationship with him, all of that was preceded by a team source telling ESPN, quote, "He's never won, he's done it his way the whole way, and never won. If he's interested in winning, he'll do what is asked of him. And if he's motivated to not be here, one way is to come, be compliant, and be who he is," which completely kills any and all progress the Bulls are trying to make in repairing this relationship with Zach to get his value up for this upcoming season. Like, even if this statement is true, that Zach has only ever really cared about himself and done his own thing, his own way, and hasn't won anything, which I think is pretty unfair and an inaccurate statement to begin with. And this is coming from someone who has been very critical of Zach throughout his tenure in Chicago. But even if it was true, or a member of the staff actually felt that way about Zach LaVine, you have to know better than to not go say this to a major news outlet, which obviously is going to use that quote and run a story. Like, how does this help you in any way in trying to get Zach to buy in and coming back to this team and building up his value again, so you don't have to resort to attaching future assets to move off of his contract? You're literally trying to make an already tough situation that you're trying to get out of even worse. Obviously, we don't know who this quote came from, and we'll probably never know given the source wanted to remain anonymous, of course, but this was such a disaster of a statement in so many ways, and more importantly, just further proves this notion of mistrust and incompetence at the top of the organization. How is this organization not aligned in their communication and approach in handling these matters with the players and the media? How do you think this is going to impact Zach LaVine and how he approaches this upcoming season while still on the team? We already know it bothers him that he has this perception of not being a winning player. We heard from this article that he felt like he was being singled out in film sessions for his mistakes on the floor and how he's receiving too much blame for the Bulls and they're losing. He's already disgruntled and probably even more frustrated that the Bulls can't find a trade for him at this point. And then when you try to do some damage control after this whole debacle, you now have this team official making this kind of statement. Absolutely mind-boggling. Again, maybe the quote was taken a bit out of context, like we don't know the tone of what was said, like, hey, Zach LaVine wants to win, he's tired of losing, and then he proceeded to say that he's never won anything, and if he wants to win, he'll do what's asked of him to be able to get to a winning situation. I don't know. But the whole thing just stinks. More backstabbing, throwing guys under the bus, just dirty work yet again from this organization. And I keep saying this, but this is coming from someone who has been hypercritical of Zach LaVine. But the way the team has handled all of this in recent years and the way this is coming to a close and Zach LaVine's time in Chicago is not right by him for a player who has been here for 7 years. And it's a bad look for the franchise to the rest of the league and how they'll throw one of their longtime players under the bus like that. Like, it's not all Zach's fault that he's never won anything when the roster throughout his tenure has been crap. Now, a few other things that Jamal Collier called out in his column that I thought were interesting. He did say that it irked AK when Zach first came to them to find a path for a new home for LaVine. They viewed this as a slight on LaVine not being committed to the team, especially after they just gave him a max contract. I can actually see that. I mean, I was irritated with Zach and his play to start the past season because it was more than just his poor play itself, but also the way he was carrying himself, was disengaged, poor attitude, and yeah, he didn't look like he was committed to trying to make this thing work. And if I was AK, yeah, I would be annoyed, especially after you just gave him a max contract. And then the other piece from the column was the Bulls were not pleased by LaVine's decision to have season-ending surgery, something they felt could have been done through rehab. Again, this is all just shaping up to be a bad and messy breakup in LaVine's time with the Bulls. The longer this thing plays out and he remains with the team, the more these types of stories, quotes, and leaks are going to get out. And it's going to get worse and worse until LaVine is finally traded. Like Jamal said, it's not a matter of if, but when he eventually gets dealt from the Bulls. There were some other pieces from the article that I found interesting but not as surprising, basically confirming what we already knew, that the Bulls have no interest in just bottoming out and blowing everything up. They really are trying to thread this needle of going down a youth movement where they can quickly build back up to being competitive again, even looking like one of those young up-and-coming teams like the Magic or the Pacers that just needs a piece or two to get themselves back in the mix. Eversley said, quote, I don't want to, a year from now, be winning 15 games and focusing on the lottery. We have an opportunity here to roll out our younger players who give us an opportunity to turn this thing around, maybe not quicker, but in a more pragmatic approach than just look at the future and building through the draft. There was also more talk of the priority this season being on the development of the younger guys, and yeah, none of this should be a surprise. I said this before, but this front office has made it clear that while they are pivoting in a new direction, their priority is not to try and tank and chase that number 1 pick in the upcoming draft, or even trying to keep their top 10 protected pick. And you guys know my stance on this. I know I'll always be in the minority on it, but I don't necessarily disagree with this approach. While I do think keeping the pick should be top of mind, and if the season starts trending in a direction where they can keep the pick by the end of the year, yeah, do what you can to keep it. But that shouldn't be the number 1 priority. The priority should be building upon what you have, developing the players you have, rather than hoping the luck of the draw of the lottery will go your way. And yes, there is a world where you can still prioritize development, try and make their young players better, and still be bad enough to keep their pick. And that's great if it happens. But don't try and make your roster worse or even rest guys throughout the season and impede their growth if you're seeing great progress from them and they're looking better than expected, just so you can lose some more games to get more lottery balls for something that isn't guaranteed. That doesn't do anybody any favors if the guys are looking great and you're like, they're winning too many games, let's try and kill the momentum and get this team to lose more for a 14% chance at best to land Cooper Flag. If it falls into place and the team sucks anyway, great. I'm fine with it happening naturally, but don't try and manufacture more losses and lose the trust and confidence of the players when nothing is guaranteed in the NBA draft. Anyway, I feel like I've said my piece on that so far this offseason, but let me know what you guys thought of all these recent reports coming out from the team on Zach LaVine. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.